Book 1, Canto 11. The Legend of the Knight of Red Cross. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Morgan Scorpion. The Faerie Queene by Edmund Spenser. Book 1. The Legend of the Knight of Red Cross. Canto 11. The knight with that old dragon fights 2 days incessantly. The third him overthrows, and gains most glorious victory. High time now gan it wex for Una fair to think of those her captive parents dear, and their forwasted kingdom to repair. Whereto whenas they now approached near, with hearty words her knight she gan to cheer, and in her modest manner thus bespake: Dear knight, as dear as ever knight was dear, that all these sorrows suffer for my sake, high heaven behold the tedious toil ye for me take. Now are we come unto my native soil, and to the place where all our perils dwell. Here haunts that fiend, and does his daily spoil. Therefore henceforth be at your keeping well, and ever ready for your foeman fell. The spark of noble courage now awake, and strive your excellent self to excell, that shall ye evermore renowmed make above all knights on earth that battle undertake. And pointing forth, lo yonder is, said she, the brazen tower, in which my parents dear for dread of that huge fiend imprisoned be, whom I from far see on the walls appear, whose sight my feeble soul doth greatly cheer. And on the top of all I do espy the watchman waiting tidings glad to hear, that my parents might I happily unto you bring, to ease you of your misery. With that they heard a roaring hideous sound, that all the air with terror filled wide, and seemed underneath to shake the steadfast ground. Eftsoons that dreadful dragon they espide, where stretched he lay upon the sunny side of a great hill, himself like a great hill. But all so soon, as he from far descried those glistering arms that heaven with light did fill, he roused himself full blithe, and hastened them until. Then bad the knight his lady yeed aloof, and to an hill herself withdraw aside, from whence she might behold that battels proof, and eke be safe from danger far descried. She him obeyd, and turned a little wide. Now, O thou sacred Muse, most learned dame, fair imp of Phoebus and his aged bride, the nurse of time and everlasting fame, that warlike hands ennoblest with immortal name. O gently come into my feeble breast, come gently, but not with that mighty rage, wherewith the martial troupes thou dost infest, and hearts of great heroes dost enrage. That nought their kindled courage may assuage, soon as thy dreadful trump begins to sound. The God of War, with his fierce equipage thou dost awake, sleep never he so sound, and scared nations dost with horror stern astound. Faire Goddess, lay that furious fit aside, till I of warres and bloody marles do sing, and Britain fields with Sarazen blood bedyed, twixt that great Faerie Queene and Paynim King, that with their horror heaven and earth did ring. A work of labour long, and endless praise, but now a while let down that haughty string, and to my tunes thy second tenor raise, that I this man of God his godly armes may blaze. By this the dreadful beast drew nigh to hand, half flying and half footing in his haste, that with his largeness measured much land, and made wide shadow under his huge waist, as mountain doth the valley overcast. Approaching nigh, he reared high afore his body monstrous, horrible and vast, which to increase his wondrous greatness more, was swoln with wrath, and poyson, and with bloody gore. And over all with brazen scales was armed, like plated coat of steele, so couched near, that nought mote pierce, ne might his course be harmed with dint of sword, nor push of pointed spear. Which as an eagle, seeing prey appear, his airy plumes doth rouse, full rudely dight, so shaked he, that horror was to hear, for as the clashing of an armour bright, such noise his roused scales did send unto the night. His flaggy wings, when forth he did difplay, were like 2 sails, In which the hollow wind is gathered full, and worketh fpeedy way. And eke the penners, that did his pinions bynd, Were like maineards, with flying canvas lynd, With which whenas him lift the aire to beat, And there by force unwonted paflage fynd. The clouds before him fled for terror great, And all the heavens stood ftill amazed with his threat. His huge long taile wound up in 100 folds, Does overfpread his long braffe fcaly backe, Whofe wreathed borts when ever he unfolds, And thicke entangled knots adowne does flacke. Bespotted with all fhields of red and blacke, It fweepeth all the land behind him farre, And of 3 furlongs does but little lacke. And at the point 2 ftings infixed are, Both deadly fharpe, that fharpeft fteele exceeden farre. But ftings and fharpeft fteele did farre exceed The fharpnefle of his cruel rending clawes. Dead was it fure as death indeed, What ever thing does touch his ravenous pawes, Or what within his reach he ever drawes. But his moft hideous head my tongue to tell Does tremble, for his deepe devouring jawes Wide gapt like the grisly mouth of hell, Through which into his darke abyffe all raving fell. And that more wondrous was, in either jaw 3 rankes of iron teeth enranged were, In which yet trickling bloud and gobbets raw Of late devoured bodies did appeare. That fight thereof bred cold congealed feare, Which to encreafe, and as at once to kill, A cloud of fmothering fmoke and sulphur feare Out of his ftinking gorge forth fteamed ftill, That all the aire about with fmoke and ftench did fill. His blazing eyes, like 2 bright fhining fhields, Did burne with wrath, and fparkled living fire, As 2 broad beacons, fet in open fields, Send forth their flames farre off to every fhire, And warning give, that enemies conspire, With fire and fword the region to invade. So flam'd his eyne with rage and rancorous ire, But farre within, as in a hollow glade, Thofe glaring lampes were fet, that made a dreadfull fhade. So dreadfully he towards him did pas, For lifting up aloft his fpecked breaft, And off bounding on the bruifed gras, As of great joyaunce of his newcome gueft, Eftfoones he gan advance his haughty creft, As fhowfed boar his briftles doth upreare, And fhooke his fcales to battell ready dreft, That made the red crofle Knight nigh quake for feare, As bidding bold defiance to his foeman neare. The Knight gan fairely couch his fteddy fpeare, And fiercely ran at him with rigorous might. The pointed fteele arriving rudely there, His harder hide would neither pierce nor bite, But glauncing forth paft forward right. Yet fore amoved with fo puiflant pufh, The wrathfull beaft about him turned light, And him fo rudely paffing by, did brufh With his long taile, that horfe and man to ground did rufh. Both horfe and man up lightly rofe againe, And frefh encounter towards him addreft, But the idle ftroke yet backe recoyled in vaine, And found no place in his deadly point to reft. Exceeding rage inflam'd the furious beaft, To be avenged of fo great defpight, For never felt his imperceivable breaft So wondrous force from hand of living wight, Yet had he proved the powre of many a puiflant knight. Then with his waving wings difplayed wide, Himfelfe up high he lifted from the ground, And with ftrong flight did forcibly divide The yeelding aire, which nigh too feeble found Her flitting parts, and element unfound, To beare fo great a weight. He cutting way with his broad fayles, about him foured round, At laft low ftooping with unwieldly fway, Snatcht up both horfe and man, to beare them quite away. Long he them bore above the fubject plaine, So farre as Eugan bow a fhaft may fend, Till ftruggling ftrong did him at laft conftraine, To let them downe before his flightes end, As haggard hawke presuming to contend With hardy fowle, above his hable might, His weary pounces all in vaine doth fpend, To trufle the prey too heavy for his flight, Which comming downe to ground, does free it felfe by fight. He fo deceifed of his griping groffe, The Knight his thrillant fpeare againe aflayd, In his brafle plated body to emboffe, And 3 mens ftrength unto the ftroke he layd, Wherewith the ftiffe became quaked, as afrayd, And glauncing from his fcaly necke did glide Clofe under his left wing, then broad difplayd, The piercing steele there wrought a wound full wide, That with the uncouth smart the monfter loudly cryde. He cryde, as raging feas are wont to roare, When wintry ftorme his wrathfull necke does threat. The rolling billowes beat the ragged fhore, As they the earth would fhoulder from her feat, And greedy gulfe does gape, as he would eat His neighbour element in his revenge. Then gin the blustring brethren boldly threat, To move the world from off his stedfaft henge, And boyfterous battell make, each other to avenge. The fteely head ftuck faft ftill in his flefh, Till with his cruel clawes he fnatcht the wood, And quite asunder broke. Forth flowed frefh a gufhing river of blacke gory blood, That drowned all the land whereon he stood. The ftreame thereof would drive a water mill. Trebly augmented was his furious mood, With bitter fence of his deepe rooted ill. The flames of fire he threw forth from his large nofe-thrill. His hideous taile then hurled he about, And therewith all enwrapt the nimble thies Of his froth-foamy fteed, whofe courage ftout, Striving to loofe the knot, that faft him ties, Himfelfe in ftreighter bands too rafh implies, That to the ground he is perforce conftrayned To throw his rider, who can quickly rife From off the earth, with dirty blood diftayned, For that reprochfull fall right fowly he difdayned. And fiercely tooke his trenchant blade in hand, With which he ftroke fo furious and fo fell, That nothing feem'd the puifance could withftand. Upon his creft the hardned iron fell. But his more hardned creft was arm'd fo well, That deeper dint therein it would not make. Yet fo extremely did the buffe him quell, That from thenceforth he fhunned the like to take, But when he faw them come, he did them ftill forsake. The Knight was wrath to fee his ftroke beguiled, And fmote again with more outrageous might. But backe again the fparkling fteele recoyled, And left not any marke where it did light, As if in adamant rock it had been pight. The Beaft impatient of his smarting wound, And of fo fierce and forcible defpight, Thought with his wings to ftie above the ground, But his late wounded wing unferviceable found. Then full of griefe and anguifh vehement, He loudly brayed, that like was never heard, And from his wide devouring oven fent A flake of fire, that flafhing in his beard, Him all amazed, and almoft made afeard. The fcorching flame fore fwinged all his face, And through his armour all his body feared, That he could not endure fo cruel cafe, But thought his armes to leave, and helmet to unlace. Not that great champion of the antique world, Whom famous poets verfe fo much doth vaunt, And hath for 12 huge labours high extold, So many furies and sharp fits did haunt, When him the poyfoned garment did enchaunt With Centaurs blood, and bloody verfes charm'd, As did this Knight $12,000 daunt, Whom fiery fteele now burnt, that erft him arm'd, That erft him goodly arm'd, now moft of all him harm'd. Faint, weary, fore, emboyled, grieved, brent with heat, Toyle, wounds, armes, fmart, and inward fire, That never man fuch mifchiefs did torment, Death better were, death did he oft defire, But death will never come when needes require. Whom fo difmayd, when that his foe beheld, He caft to fuffer him no more refpire, But gan his fturdy fterne about to weld, And him fo ftrongly ftroke, that to the ground him feld. It fortuned, as faire it then befell, Behind his backe unweeting where he stood, Of ancient time there was a springing well, From which faft trickled forth a filver flood, Full of great vertues, and for medicine good. While home, before that curfed Dragon got That happy land, and all with innocent blood Defil'd thofe facred waves, it rightly hot The well of life, nor yet his vertues had forgot. For unto life the dead it could reftore, And guilt of finfull crimes cleane wafh away. Thofe that with ficknefle were infeded fore, It could recure, and aged long decay renew, As one were borne that very day. Both Syla this and Jordan did excell, And the English Barth, and eke the German Spal, Nor can Cephice nor Hebrus match this well. Into the fame Knight backe overthrowen fell. Now gan the golden Phoebus for to fteepe His fiery face in billowes of the weft, And his faint fteedes watered in ocean deepe, Whileft from their diurnall labours they did reft, When that infernall monfter, having keft his weary throe into that living well, Can high advance his broad difcoloured breaft Above his wonted pitch, with countenance fell, And clapt his iron wings, as Victor he did dwell. Which when this penfive Lady faw from farre, Great woe and forrow did her foule affay, As weening that the fad end of the warre, And gan to higheft God entyrely pray, That feared chance from her to turne away. With folded hands and knees full lowly bent, All night fhe watcht, ne once adown would lay Her dainty limbs in her fad dreariment, But praying ftill did wake, and waking did lament. The morrow next gan early to appeare, That Titan rofe to run his daily race. But early ere the morrow next gan reare, Out of the fea faire Titans dewy face Uprofe the gentle Virgin from her place, And looked all about, if fhe might fpy Her loved Knight to move his manly pace. For fhe had great doubt of his fafety, Since late fhe faw him fall before his enemy. At laft fhe ware he upftarted brave out of the well, Wherein he drenched lay, As Eagle frefh out of the ocean wave, Where he hath left his plumes all hoary gray, And deckt himfelfe with feathers youthly gay. Like Aias hawke up mountaines unto the fkies, His newly budded pinions to affay, And marvels at himfelfe, ftill as he flies. So new this newborne Knight to battell new did rife. Whom when the damned fiend fo frefh did fpy, No wonder if he wondred at the fight, And doubted, whether his late enemy it were, Or other new furplyed Knight. He now to prove his late renewed might, High brandifhing his bright dew burning blade, Upon his crefted fcalpe fo fore did fmite, That to the fkull a yawning wound it made, The deadly dint his dulled fences all difmayd. I wote not, whether the revenging fteele Were hardned with that holy water dew, Wherein he fell, or fharper edge did feele, Or his baptized hands now greater grew, Or other fecret vertue did enfew. Else never could the force of flefhly arme Nor molten metall in his bloud embrew, For till that ftoune could never wight him harme, By fubtilty, nor flight, nor might, nor mighty charme. The cruel wound enraged him fo fore, That loud he yelded for exceeding paine, As 100 ramping lyons feem'd to roare, Whom ravenous hunger did thereto conftraine. Then gan he tofle aloft his ftretched traine, And therewith fcourge the buxom aire fo fore, That to his force to yielden it was faine, Ne ought his fturdy ftrokes might ftand afore, That high trees overthrew, and rockes in pieces tore. The fame advancing high above his head, With fharp intending fting fo rude him fmote, That to the earth him drove, as ftricken dead, Ne living wight would have him life behote. The mortall fting his angry needle fhot Quite through his fhield, and in his fhoulder feaft, Where faft it ftuck, ne would thereout be got. The griefe thereof him wondrous fore difeased, Ne might his rankling paine with patience be appeased. But yet more mindfull of his honour deare, Then of the grievous fmart, which him did wring, From lothed foyle he can him lightly reare, And ftrove to loofe the foule infixed fting, Which when in vaine he tryde with ftruggling, Inflam'd with wrath, his raging blade he heft, And ftrooke fo ftrongly, that the knotty fting Of his huge taile he quite asunder cleft. 5 joynts thereof he hewed, and but the ftump him left. Heart cannot think, what outrage and what cries, With foule enfoldred fmoke and flashing fire, The hell bred beaft threw forth unto the fkies, That all was covered with darknefle dire. Then fraught with rancour and engorged ire, He caft at once him to revenge for all, And gathering up himfelfe out of the mire, With his uneven wings did fiercely fall Upon his funbright fhield, and gript it faft withall. Much was the man encombred with his hold, In feare to lofe his weapon in his paw, Ne wift yet how his talents to unfold. Ne harder was from Cerberus' greedy jaw To pluck a bone, than from his cruel claw To reave by ftrength the griped gage away. Thrice he aflayd it from his foot to draw, And thrice in vaine to draw it did affay. It booted nought to think, to rob him of his pray. Though when he faw no powre might prevaile, His trufty fword he called to his laft aide, Wherewith he fiercely did his foe affaile, And double blowes about him ftoutly layd, That glauncing fire out of the iron playd, As fparks from the anvil ufed to fly, When heavy hammers on the wedge are fwayd. Therewith at last he forced him to untie One of his grasping feet, him to defend thereby. The other foote fast fixed on his fhield, Whenas no ftrength nor ftrokes mote him conftraine to loose, Ne yet the warlike pledge to yield. He fmote thereat with all his might and maine, That nought fo wondrous puifance might fuftaine. Upon the joynt the lucky fteele did light, And made fuch way, that hew'd it quite in twaine. The paw yet mifled not his minifht might, But hung ftill on the fhield, as it at firft was pight. For griefe thereof, and devilifh defpight, From his infernal furnace forth he threw Huge flames, that dimmed all the heavens light, And rolled in dufkifh fmoke and brimftone blew, As burning Aetna from his boyling ftew Doth belch out flames, and rocks in pieces broke, And flagged ribs of mountains molten new, Enwrapt in coal black clouds and filthy fmoke, That all the land with ftench, and heaven with horror choke. The heat whereof, and harmfull peftilence, So fore him noyd, that forced him to retire A little backwards for his beft defence, To fave his body from the scorching fire, Which he from hellifh entrayles did expire. It chaunft eternall God, that chaunce did guide, As he recoyled backwards in the mire, His nigh forewearied feeble feet did flide, And downe he fell, with dread of fhame fore terrifide. There grew a goodly tree him faire befide, Loaden with fruit, and apples rosie red, As they in pure vermilion had been dyed, Whereof great vertues over all were read. For happy life to all, which thereon fed, And life eke everlafting did befall. Great God it planted in that bleffed ftead, With his almighty hand, and did it call The tree of life, the crime of our firft fathers fall. In all the world like was not to be found, Save in that foyle, where all good things did grow, And freely fprung out of the fruitfull ground, As incorrupted nature did them fow, Till that dread Dragon did all overthrow. Another like faire tree eke grew thereby, Whereof whoso did eate, eftfoones did know Both good and ill. O mournefull memory! That tree through one mans fault hath doen us all to die. From that firft tree forth flowed, as from a well, A trickling ftreame of balme, moft foveraine and dainty deare, Which on the ground ftill fell, and overflowed All the fertile plaine, as it had dewed been with timely raine. Life and long health that gracious ointment gave, And deadly wounds could heale, and reare againe The fencelefle courfe appointed for the grave. And to that fame he fell, which did from death him fave. For nigh thereto the ever damned beaft Durft not approach, for he was deadly made, And all that life preferved did deteft. Yet he it oft adventured to invade. By this the drooping daylight gan to fade, And yield his roome to fad fucceeding night, Who with her fable mantle gan to fhade The face of earth, and wayes of living wight, And high her burning torch set up in heaven bright. When gentle Una faw the fecond fall Of her deare knight, who weary of long fight, And faint through loffe of blood, moved not at all, But lay as in a dreame of deepe delight, Befmear'd with precious balme, whofe vertuous might Did heale his wounds, and fcorching heat allay, Againe fhe stricken was with fore affright, And for his fafety gan devoutly pray, And watch the noyous night, and wait the joyous day. The joyous day gan early to appeare, And faire Aurora from the dewy bed Of aged Tithon gan herfelfe to reare, With rosie cheekes, for fhame as blufhing red. Her golden locks for haft were loosely shed About her eares, when Una did her marke, Climbe to her chariot, all with flowers fpred, From heaven high to chace the chearelefle darke, With merry note her loud salutes the morning larke. Then frefhly up arofe the doughty knight, All healed of his hurts and woundes wide, And did himfelfe to battell ready dight, Whofe early foe awaiting him befide, To have devoured, fo foone as day he spide. When now he faw himfelfe fo frefhly reare, As if late fight had not him damnifide, He woxe difmayd, and gan his fate to feare, Nathlefle with wonted rage he him advanced neare. And in his firft encounter, gaping wide, He thought attance him to have fwallowed quite, And rufht upon him with outrageous pride, Who him rencountring fierce, as hawke in flight, Perforce rebutted backe. The weapon bright, Taking advantage of his open jaw, ran through his mouth with so importune might, that deep empierced his darkesome hollow maw, and backe retir'd, his life blood forth with all did draw. So downe he fell, and forth his life did breath, that vanifht into fmoke and cloudes fwift. So downe he fell, that th'earth him underneath did groane, as feeble fo great load to lift. So downe he fell, as an huge rocky clift, whofe falfe foundation waves have wafht away, with dreadfull poyfe is from the maine land rift, and rolling downe, great Neptune doth difmay. So downe he fell, and like an heaped mountaine lay. The Knight himfelfe even trembled at his fall, So huge and horrible a maffe it feem'd. And his deare Ladie, that beheld it all, Durft not approach for dread, which fhe misdeem'd. But yet at laft, when as the direfull fiend She faw not ftirre, oft fhaking vaine affright, She nigher drew, and faw the joyous end. Then God fhe prais'd, and thankt her faithfull Knight, That had atchieved fo great a conqueft by his might. Canto XI. Book I. The Legend of the Knight of Red Cross.